There is not much in what Valerie said that I disagree with without sounding like an asshole. Reality is, what Valerie wants to do and is advocating for is so complex and so challenging to implement that you have to sort of take a step back and ask some very critical questions. So, what I'm going to say here is I'm not criticizing the rights framework that Dr. Verdoot made mention to, but I want you to think critically about some things within that framework that she proposes. So the first question is, Valerie used this expression, the children are encouraged to behave in the optimal way, right? First and foremost, children are not robots. They are not computers. They are not designed or should be encouraged to behave in an optimal way. Second of all, children are, who decides what the optimal way is? That sounds like some, corporate legal mumbo jumbo that somebody somewhere came up with to describe how children behave. But some children thrive when they are pushed by their parents into a certain discipline. Some children thrive when they are pushed by their parents into work. Some children thrive when they are left alone to be creative. Some children thrive when they're given a violin and they're told, don't come out until you've mastered this song. It sounds cruel to you and I, but the point being is that some children thrive under different circumstances. And there is a real difficulty with saying the expectation is that the rules have to apply so that children behave optimally, which sounds pre-programmed.
Not behave optimally. I said develop optimally.
Okay, develop optimally. Sorry for
it's different.
All right, can you say optimally again, please? Develop optimally. But then, the same argument stands. What is developing optimally? I didn't interrupt you, Valerie.
True.
Let me finish my point, okay? But why would they be allowed to develop optimally? Who determines what is developing optimally, right? Somebody has to create a threshold for what developing optimally is. Some people will thrive later on in life. Other people will thrive when they're younger, when you create a certain framework. You also forget, when you're applying the rights of the child, that parents are learning as they go. If they make mistakes along the way, that is part of the child rearing process as well. So by putting the child rights to the front of the conversation, you are also diminishing the parents' rights to learn if you're creating a framework for optimal development, Valerie. Okay. Secondly, we have people that are pushed by parents. These are the extreme cases, right? We see about these, the kind of Robert Downey Jr.'s of the world, the Macaulay Culkins of the world, child actors who are pushed by their parents. Britney Spears is maybe a more recent example, where the media hears and reports about these, a documentary is made, it's put on Netflix, and everybody goes, oh my God, we got to do something about these pushy parents. But what you don't see is the 99% of the parents who are recognizing that their children have limits, that are putting them into something that they want to do. We have some sort of moral reaction because it's different from what we would have done. And then by creating a rights-based framework for children, which has this kind of provision of protection, you have to get the balance right in accordance to the this kind of, I think it's very dangerous to give government the right to say, you're not allowing your child to develop optimally within a framework that has been created by the United Nations. I think that's the first challenge there. Second of all, you got to go back to kind of understanding rules and law. Law means nothing without sanctions. People very rarely, people like to obey the law, but if you want to deter people from doing something, you use law and you back it up with the threat of sanctions. You know, you can tell people to go 55 on the motorway, but it's the speeding ticket and the insurance rates that cause people to stay the speed limit, not the sign on the road. So by putting these kind of principles out there and putting a deterrent on there, you're saying to parents, hey, we don't trust you to raise your children the right way. We don't trust you to be to monitor their behavior, or to use Valerie's expression, to allow them to develop optimally. So we're going to pass a law backed up by sanctions to stop you raising your children in the way that you want to. Thirdly, this phrase of economic exploitation, right? Go look on the internet for examples of economic exploitation, right? We're talking about children in Bangladesh that are making matches out of white phosphorus, right? So that they can raise enough money to help their family eat for the month or the week or the day. That's economic exploitation. The notion of the idea that a child is sitting in front of a toy and a parent is taking a photograph of that child playing with the toy and then writing a blog themselves and putting that online, and then the world going, oh, that's a child influencer, when the child was basically a model for a photograph, which they would have done anyway if the camera wasn't there because they were given a toy. To call that economic exploitation, and then you go create a law backed up by sanctions for the purposes of regulating parents in the West and saying that's economic exploitation, I think most people in the world would go, no, that's not economic exploitation. I'm doing what parents normally do with children. I'm not taking advantage of them. I'm not forcing them into doing work. I'm not sending them off to a factory to be exploited by somebody to benefit me economically. And the fact that you've put a law in the books and then backed it up by sanctions, I think most people would say that's not right. So I understand the importance of having these international frameworks that can apply globally, but to try and take economic exploitation and apply it to, let's say, for example, babies who are playing with a toy anyway, just doing under photogenic lighting for the purposes of a parent writing a blog because the parent is writing the blog and using the uploading skills for the internet. That's economic exploitation. I'm not buying that argument. Finally, here's the problem with this. A child, I completely agree with Valerie's, the sliding doctrine, right? That babies need to have this consideration, whereas a teenager has other considerations. But there's almost this kind of intrinsic or inherent, we need to give babies more protection than we do teenagers. That's kind of implicit. I don't know if that's maybe Valerie's intention, but that's the way that I read it. That children see this as being like, I'm a gamer, I'm a growing person, I'm an adult. But there are far more instances where you would want the law to interfere with a teenager who's obsessed with video games than interfering with a child who is a baby who is playing with Lego. Lego is a natural, you give a child a piece of plastic, it's a toy, you would want them to do that. But the idea that a teenager would want or have less expectations or less interference, I think is a bit of a misnomer, and it lacks the contextual thing. The contextual awareness of how some children need more protection than others. You can't just say, well, you're a teenager, so we're going to have a sliding scale of rules based upon age, et cetera, et cetera. Therein lies the problem with regulating influencers. If you're going to have laws on the books, you're effectively saying to parents, we don't trust you to do this yourself. And if we're going to put laws on the books, then they have to have sanctions. So you're going to be sanctioning parents for what they would normally be doing if they were interacting solely with their child. The only bit that makes this different is the economic compensation for the work that the parents are doing on small children where they can't consent to their picture being taken in the first place. And when it gets to teenagers, then there's this kind of idea of them working and using these additional revenue streams. And I understand that those additional revenue streams might be beneficial to teenagers, but then if you're going to give them more participatory rights and more play rights because they're becoming young adults, you actually might want to have more interference so that they don't abuse the time playing games to generate revenue for economic. So there's less exploitation, but you might want more interference. And I just don't think that the economic exploitation protections that are built into these discussions around influencers reflect modern society in the countries in which we live. I don't think, there might be extreme examples, but we already have protections for child abuse on the books. To sort of say, oh, well, we want to regulate influencers on top of that is a problematic stretching of protection beyond the stuff that's already there for protecting children. I can tell that Valerie's quite annoyed by me, so I will put that back over to her to rebut my rebuttal. Dr. Verdoot.
Wow. Where to start?
Cat got your tongue?
Where to start, Mark? First of all, I said indeed develop in an optimal way, and
it's Dr. Leiser. It's Dr. Leiser.
Professor Dr. Emeritus Leiser. What I wanted to say. So first of all, regarding the optimal development and children not behaving in an optimal way, like we don't have this one golden standard of what is an optimal developed child. Like that doesn't exist, of course. What I was more getting at was optimally developing.
But if you create optimal standards as a legal benchmark, then somebody somewhere is going to say you're not raising your child or allowing them to develop optimally.
But
if
it means
you create
giving
optimal
them
development.
I didn't interrupt you, so you
yes, you did. That was my one. We're even.
I'm gonna mute. Okay, so what I mean is again that it means that all children should receive all of the opportunities to develop in an optimal way, and it means optimal development means something different for each child. Like it means it depends on the circumstances in which they're growing up. It depends on their parents, the parenting styles. Like it means giving them sufficient opportunities to grow, to learn, to develop. So not develop into some kind of robot or Übermensch idea, not that at all. It's just giving them an optimal way to develop. And optimal development means then that they should have all of the rights that are enshrined in the convention. They should be able to realize or to see these rights realized and safeguarded and protected and promoted through the regulatory framework, for instance. So that about optimal development. Then regarding the role of parents, I mean, from a children's rights perspective, yes, the convention, again, it recognizes that parents are the primary responsibility holders or bearers for the growing up of for caring for their children and for raising their children. So they make parenting decisions and they are responsible for that. But it doesn't mean that states shouldn't provide guidance for parents and cannot provide guidance for parents, like meaning educationally, awareness raising. That's maybe some of that they might not understand some of the or can estimate some of the potential impacts of raising children as influencers then from a very young age, from a baby playing Lego, like you mentioned. I mean, it might lead to or the child might grow up and developing in a way that the child himself might, like at a later stage in life, might decide, well, I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to have this online presence, and my parents made this decision for me, and I really didn't want this. So it's not only these problems with exploitation, or you don't consider exploitation, but monetization, let's say, then, like, it's not just that problem. It's also just it's their right to privacy, their right to data protection that is at stake here as well, and their right to, in that sense, choose their own kind of identity that they want to bring out to the world, for instance. I mean, it should be up to them to decide what, yeah, that's also part of their right to an identity, their right to informational privacy. You know, these kind of concepts also play here as well. And then regarding the element that you mentioned about economic exploitation, so I know that this view of child labor and the concept that you mentioned, or the way that you understand it, I mean, that was the initial conceptualization of economic exploitation at the time in 1989, when the convention was first drafted and was entered into force. But this has developed. I mean, these rights that are enshrined in the convention, you need to interpret them as well in the, that's in today's new digital reality. And only recently, I think it was on the 4th of February, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. So this is the body that interprets the convention and that gives guidance to states on how this body needs to be interpreted, and how they need to, or how the convention is interpreted, and how states need to implement it. And then the states have to report on these general comments. So in this general comment on children's rights in the digital environment, the committee clearly mentions Article 32 and economic exploitation in the context of these forms of work, these forms of labor, these new types of labor that are emerging in the digital environment. And it's very clear that they have reinterpreted this right and brought it into this new digital reality, in the digital world. So in that sense, I mean, what it means is that states will have to report, they will have to review their laws that protect children, so that the laws that currently already protect children from or against normal child labor, for instance, or against other forms of monetization, whatever. And they will have to reinterpret it in this particular context as well. So they will have to review it. They will have to start thinking about this more thoroughly, and they also have to, well, inform parents and children about the protections that are currently applicable as well. So, I mean, I really disagree with you on that. I think that I mean, I understand, of course, that the problem of traditional child labor is something completely different than this problem. And I'm not saying that that's not a serious issue. Of course it is, but this is as well, I think. It's just a different interpretation in a new time, I think.
Can I come back in on this, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Right. Okay. So again, this goes back to the fundamental point, I think, where we agree and disagree on. I mean, if you're going to, you're using phrases like committees reinterpret and say that child labor should be done for the digital and stuff like that. I think we all know what child abuse looks like or could look like. I think we all know what child labor looks like. Where I think we're stuck is on these use of these phrases that are creeping in about exploitation, right? And I'll give you an example. Let me ask you this, or ask the group this. If I am writing a family blog, and I write a story, I become an adult influencer, and as an adult, as part of my narrative, I create stories about my family featuring pictures of my children, right? Nobody is going to come along and say, you're exploiting the child. Nobody's going to say you're exploiting the child. You're going to say, you're not even going to be on the radar of anybody going, you're using child influencers the wrong way, because you're an adult doing that. So you're never going to have that.
Wait, no.
Hold on. Let me finish my point. Right? But there's something that sort of triggers people when they see a child as being the star, that gets people upset about the role of the child who's being used to promote and as you said, monetize, that there's a financial benefit that probably drifts to the parents.